They don't see the point, the principles being violated or not matters they care about or have emotional commitments to. So, we can undertake a spurious mapping between the three theories and three main tropes or tools of the social scientists inclined to humour. That is irony, satire and parody. But this is not a wise thing to do. So instead I'm going to take each in turn, give a definition and show some examples. While irony is a difficult term to define with many variants, the most common definition according to Colebrook is saying something contrary to what is meant. Though she regards this as simplistic, almost to the point of uselessness, it immediately throws up problems for the social scientist who has, generally speaking, undergone an extensive training aimed at avoiding exactly that sort of thing. Well, irony is a metaphor of opposites, a seeing of something from the viewpoint of its antithesis, and it is the ability to do this which constitutes the art of social science. Indeed, Brown contends that the prime instrument of sociological knowledge is an eye for paradox, contradiction and reversals that are latent beneath the more obvious manifest content of action. And he goes on. The sociologist must estrange taken for granted reality so that it appears in a new and previously unsuspected light. He must be the man who shouts theatre in the middle of a crowded fire. Well, irony constitutes a potential analytical tool in the social sciences. And irony lies at the heart of what Louis Schneider calls a dialectical bent, which characterises sociological thought and which has yielded some of its most fundamental insights. And while Schneider accepts there is no usable dialectical method as such, there is nonetheless a dialectical worldview which emphasises development through conflict, the moving power of human passions which produce wholly unintended results, and the irony of sudden reversals, a list which reads like a standard plot summary of a Baroque drama. And a particular note here is the unintended or unanticipated consequence, which amounts almost to an irony inherent in the human condition. And Schneider goes so far as to say that it has actually been argued by some, though he does not specify who, that the unintended consequence is the most important one the social sciences have to deal with. It is clearly basic to economics, and I think we can all sign up to that one. Well, the importance of the unanticipated consequence in social critique has a long history and is brought out nicely in Bernard Mandeville's satire from 1714 of The Fable of the Bees, in which a hive of bees that in every way resembles the society of men, lies, cheats, deceives, etc., is made virtuous at a stroke. Peace breaks out, honesty prevails, and the hive goes into terminal decline as trade inevitably dwindles, starting with the public houses, because the bees prefer to pay their debts rather than spend their money on drink. And the moral is, without great vices is a vain utopia selected in the brain. So vice is beneficial found when it's by justice locked and bound. And Mandeville concludes that the qualifications which we all pretend to be ashamed of are the great support of a flourishing society. This is the utopian paradox, which asserts that utopia would, if it could be realised, which fortunately it cannot, cause the most incredible disasters. The true utopia is then, in fact, dysutopia, since virtue and goodness lead inevitably to social collapse. Well, a couple of examples of ironic research from my own discipline, which is education. I particularly like Ian Munday's ironic analysis of rote learning of poetry, which, far from being a repressive pedagogical practice, in fact enables us to suffer awakening to the poem's otherness. And I've also conducted an ironic analysis of the professional learning community, which shows that collaboration leads to isolation, cohesion and trust undermine learning, openness leads to surveillance, and commitment reduces organisational adaptability. So irony is an analytical tool by which to overturn our assumptions of what constitutes reality. And it does this by creating ironic oppositions. And one way to do this is by using what Kenneth Burke refers to as planned incongruity. And Burke says, a word belongs by custom to a certain category, and by rational planning you wrench it loose and metaphorically apply it to a different category. Planned incongruity involves coaching a word beyond its customary barriers, often with valuable interpretive results. And this gives us such concepts as Thorstein Veblen's trained-in capacity, by which narrow specialisation widens the individual's field of ignorance, Functional stupidity, a refusal to use intellectual resources outside a narrow and safe terrain, as set out in Alverson and Spicer's stupidity-based theory of organisations. And interpassivity, the outsourcing of enjoyment through the delegation of passivity to some other object. And this is Zizek's idea. He says, I am passive through the other. I concede to the other the passive aspect of enjoying, while I can remain actively engaged. And he gives us as examples the DVD that watches TV for you, enabling you to get on with something else, the canned laughter that replaces your own in situation comedies, and for many academics, the downloading of research papers on some device or other as an alternative to actually reading them. So how can we make use of this? Well, planned incongruity is a serious piece of kit. I'm currently working on a paper on this. It can operate in three ways. It provides explanatory power, it offers a critique of the assumptions common in the field, and it opens up a space for further research. But is irony funny? It's quite funny. It causes amusement. Even the story of Oedipus Rex, which is certainly ironic, causes a wry smile, and that's a thought I want you to hang on to for later. And pleasure derives from guessing the irony, but the extent of this comic pleasure can be directly related to the principle of high contrast, which states that the wider the disparity between appearance and reality, the greater the irony, and hence the greater the pleasure to be gained, and the law of irony, which states that when the highest degree of incongruity is combined with the greatest degree of inevitability, there results a statement of the greatest theoretical value. Thus, the greatest pleasure is derived from the highest contrast, and this also gives rise to the greatest theoretical insights. And this produces a somewhat unexpected and hence ironic finding that the most important sociological insights are also likely to be the ones which produce the greatest pleasure, i.e. the funniest. So, moving on to satire. Satire has been defined as a literary manner which blends a critical attitude with humour and wit to the end that human institutions or humanity may be improved. So while irony, as a rhetorical trope which exerts its effects through juxtaposition and the creation of incongruity, constitutes a potential analytical tool in the social sciences, satire may be considered a genre, a mode of writing or a narrative form, a means for and of representation. In overly simplistic terms, then, irony contributes to the development of theory, while satire functions as a form of critique, achieving its ends through challenging our assumptions by making them appear ridiculous. For its defenders, satire certainly has a long and honourable history as a means of exposing vice and folly, revealing the workings of power and providing valuable social and political comment. But the satirist occupies an ambiguous position in society, always skating on the thin ice of retribution. And the satirists can never, therefore, be quite sure about their reception, and this is certainly the case for the social scientist with satiric attitude. Satire is, James Caputo says, a style which gives scandal to academic protocol. As such, he says, it is not without risk to the academic and should only be attempted after attaining tenure and promotion. Indeed, I was once censured by the anonymous reviewer of a paper on an autoethnographic study of professional identity, which I had submitted to a rather prestigious journal, for a satirical reference to the Russell Group of elite UK universities, named for the London hotel in which this cabal first got together, which the reviewer felt reflected badly not only on the author, but on autoethnography as well. This was the diary entry. Attend research seminar in London. Decide to stay at the Russell Hotel, drawn by its exciting and glamorous associations. Most academics you meet who work at Russell Group institutions usually let this slip within the first few minutes, especially if it's one of the more surprising of these, like Nottingham. So I'm keen to experience a sumptuous Victorian pile where it all began. As befits my status from a non-Russell Group institution, I'm given a tiny room by the lift shaft overlooking the wheelie bins, a materialisation of my academic identity. It is, of course, entirely possible that the reviewer, if not from Nottingham, was at a similarly prestigious institution. In any event, the paper was rejected by that particular journal. Erving Goffman, of course, is the leading exponent of satire in the social sciences, particularly in his classic works, Silence and Stigma. But actually, I'm not going to use any of his examples. Instead, I'm going to draw on a paper of my own about the university called Today, How Can We Not Speak About the University Towards the Next Generation? And I presented this at a seminar which asked, is there room for a dysfunctional university? And the quote in the title of the paper comes from Derrida. In this paper, I used the ironic technique of taking the opponent's argument and defending it to the point of absurdity. And here I drew on J.G. Wissemer's book about the future of the university called Towards the Third Generation University. And in it, he sets out 7 challenges for the 3GU in the quest for excellence. And I operationalise these to give a series of KPIs, key performance indicators, that can be used to determine functionality and fitness for purpose for the university engaged in this quest. And the 7 KPIs are exploitation of knowledge as core business, entrepreneurialism, operates in an international competitive market, it's open, collaborating with many partners, there's an emphasis on transdisciplinary research, there's a rise of institutes, it's multicultural, it provides mass and elite education, it's cosmopolitan, and there is no direct funding and no state interference. And I then looked for evidence of these, drawing on literature, reports, and especially the Times Higher Education Supplement. And I'm going to take the first on the list by way of illustration. So exploitation of knowledge and entrepreneurialism. This requires the adoption of an entrepreneurial outlook with the aim of becoming less dependent on state funding for core activities. And this encompasses activities such as the formation of carve-outs for the packaging and sale of professional knowledge, and exploitation of the knowledge created through research in spinouts or spin-offs, sponsorship deals, and raising cash from benefactors through the exploitation of symbolic capital. Spinouts is clearly an area of considerable activity in the UK over the past few years, and Edinburgh leads the way, with more spun-out companies than any other UK higher education institution. However, Harrison and Leach argue that the belief in the efficacy of the university spin-off is based less on substantive rationality than on voodoo, and in any case, no Scottish universities believe to make money from spin-outs. But such entrepreneurial activity has had other impacts on the university. A poll of 103 knowledge transfer officers found that just over 2/3 say links with business are more important now than they were 5 years ago for academics seeking to rise through the ranks. However, Executive Director of Oriel, Philip Graham, commented that though this is positive, much more still needs to be done, since 80% of those polled still thought that promotion depends more on research reputation